They want love badly. Then the moment it starts becoming real, something inside them tightens. What they asked for is finally here. A steady text, a warm presence, the person actually trying to stay. And instead of relaxing, they feel restless. Instead of moving closer, they start needing distance. This confuses everyone. It confuses the person loving them, and it confuses them too. Because the craving was real. The loneliness was real. The longing was real. The late-night ache for connection was real. So why does closeness suddenly feel wrong once it stops being imaginary? Why does love feel easier to want than to receive? This is one of the most painful patterns in adult intimacy. Some people do not run from love because they do not care. They run because real love touches places in them that fantasy never had to reach. It wakes up hope, exposure, dependence, and fear all at once. From the outside, it could look inconsistent. They say they want something serious, then pull back when someone actually shows up seriously. They ask for honesty, then get uneasy when the conversation becomes emotionally honest. They miss closeness, then go cold after a tender moment. That contradiction is not random. It usually comes from a nervous system that associates love with risk, not just comfort. So when connection is distant, they can crave it. When connection becomes real, their body starts treating it like something harder to survive. That is why they can be deeply lonely and still hard to love. They are not lying about wanting intimacy. They are colliding with what intimacy does to them. It makes them feel visible, accountable, emotionally open, and no longer in full control. At first, love feels exciting because it is still mostly possibility. There is chemistry, curiosity, projection, and the beautiful blur of not fully knowing. In that stage, they can be magnetic. Warm, attentive, thoughtful, even surprisingly vulnerable. They answer quickly. They stay up talking. They say things that make you feel chosen. But early closeness is still flexible. It has not yet asked them to trust consistency. Then something shifts. The connection starts becoming more real than symbolic. You learn each other's patterns. You notice who reaches first, who reassures, who goes quiet, who stays. Maybe you ask where this is going. Maybe they realize you genuinely care. Maybe they feel how much they would actually lose if this relationship mattered more. And that is often the turning point. Because now love is no longer just a feeling. It is becoming an emotional structure. A structure has weight. It creates expectations, routines, vulnerability, and the possibility of real disappointment. That is when old patterns wake up. Not because the relationship is wrong, but because it is starting to feel important. For some people, importance does not feel romantic. It feels dangerous. The more real the bond becomes, the more they start scanning for escape. They may not do this consciously. They just begin feeling irritated, trapped, uncertain, or suddenly less sure. Small things start feeling bigger than they are. They notice your tone more. They need more space. They feel a strange urge to slow everything down. Sometimes they even convince themselves the chemistry is gone. But what actually changed is that intimacy became less abstract and more mutual. That difference matters. Fantasy does not require regulation. Real closeness does. It asks you to stay present after the rush, after the mystery, after the idealization fades. And for someone who craves love but fears what love exposes, that is the hardest part. They can handle desire better than they can handle being emotionally known. Because being known means being reachable. It means someone can now affect you in deeper ways. It means their silence can hurt more, their disappointment can matter more, and your own needs can no longer stay hidden. That is unbearable for people who learned early that neediness was unsafe, embarrassing, or too costly, so they try to protect themselves before love gets enough access. This does not always come from obvious heartbreak. Sometimes it comes from subtler emotional histories. Maybe they were loved but not understood consistently. Maybe affection existed but emotional safety did not always stay. Maybe they had to be self-contained too early. Maybe closeness came with tension, unpredictability, or the sense that someone's warmth could change without warning. When that happens, the heart learns a confusing lesson. Love is deeply wanted, but full access to it feels risky. So people grow up craving what they still do not quite trust. They want to be chosen, but they brace the moment someone chooses them clearly. They want reassurance, but they feel exposed receiving too much of it. They want commitment, but they panic once commitment stops being a vague dream and starts becoming real life. This is why they often seem most open before the relationship fully forms. They can long freely before they have something to lose. Once the bond is real, they start protecting themselves from the very thing they begged life to send them. That is the tragedy of it. And if you've lived this pattern, you know how strange it feels from the inside. You miss being close while actively creating more distance. You want the text, then feel pressure when it arrives. You want the date, then feel drained before it happens. You want to be held, then pull emotionally backward the moment the room gets too tender. None of it feels simple. Part of you is relieved to be loved. Another part is already planning how to stay less affected. That inner split creates a lot of hidden shame. You start asking yourself why you cannot just relax into something good. Why does healthy interest feel heavier than unavailable attention? Why does sincerity sometimes create more panic than mixed signals? Often the answer is emotional familiarity. Unavailable love hurts, but it may feel more recognizable. Distance gives you room to crave without fully depending. Mixed signals keep hope alive without forcing deep surrender. But healthy love is different. It asks you to stop surviving connection and start participating in it. That can feel almost too still at first. There is less chasing, less guessing, less emotional static. And if your system equates intensity with love, steadiness can feel underwhelming before it feels safe. So you start pulling away not from boredom, but from unfamiliar peace. This is where many people misread themselves. They think they lost interest when what they actually lost was the adrenaline that made love feel emotionally charged. A calm connection can feel flat if you were trained by inconsistency. Stability gives your fear fewer places to hide. There is no emotional maze to solve, no constant decoding, no dramatic distance to bridge. Just presence, and presence can be terrifying when you are not used to being met without confusion. Then there is the issue of identity. Some people are so used to longing that receiving changes who they have to be. Longing lets them stay in motion. It gives them a role, the one who hopes, waits, imagines, and aches. Receiving asks for something else. It asks them to let love touch the parts they usually manage alone. That can feel like losing control of the self they built around independence. So even while craving closeness, they begin defending their distance. They say they need space to think, and become less expressive after emotionally intimate moments. They may focus on flaws that never bothered them before. They may suddenly feel overwhelmed by ordinary relational needs. A simple good morning text starts feeling intrusive. A kind check-in starts feeling like pressure. Not because the other person did something wrong, because real care creates emotional consequence. If they reply warmly, they are involved. If they stay open, they are affected. If they let themselves need you, they risk grief if you change. And some people would rather feel lonely than feel powerless. That is rarely how they phrase it. Usually it sounds more reasonable. I just need time. I'm not sure what I feel. Things are moving too fast. Sometimes the statements are true, but sometimes they are also emotional smoke from a fire deeper down. The deeper fear is not speed. It is exposure. It is the moment love stops being optional in the body. The moment your mood starts depending on someone who now matters. That is where old self-protection starts working overtime. They become harder to read right when they are feeling more. This is why people who crave love but pull away can be so confusing to date. Their withdrawal often happens right after something meaningful. Right after a tender night. Right after a serious conversation, a soft confession, a moment that made the connection feel less casual and more real. You would think warmth would create more warmth. Instead, it triggers distance. Because tenderness can leave them emotionally raw. After closeness, they need to recover from how much they felt. They go quiet, not always because the bond meant little, sometimes because it meant too much, too quickly. And if nobody understands that pattern, both people start telling painful stories about it. The partner feels rejected. The distant person feels pressured, guilty, or defective. The relationship becomes a place where care keeps getting translated into misunderstanding. This often shows up in small scenes. They spend the whole night opening up, then act strangely neutral the next day. They tell you they miss you, then become harder to reach once plans are actually made. They lean in emotionally, then pull away after you respond sincerely. They may even test love without admitting it. They stay just distant enough to see whether you will keep coming closer. Not because they are always manipulative, often because they want proof of safety without having to risk full emotional exposure first. But love cannot grow well inside constant testing. If someone must always prove they will stay, the relationship starts revolving around fear rather than connection. And that is the cost of this pattern. It protects the person from immediate vulnerability, but it also prevents the steady intimacy they claim to want. So yes, they crave love, but often they crave a version of love that lets them stay guarded inside it. They want closeness without losing control. They want reassurance without fully revealing how much reassurance they need. They want commitment without the helplessness that commitment awakens. They want to be loved deeply, but not touched too deeply by the fact of being loved. That is an impossible negotiation. Real love changes your internal world. It makes you care on days you wish you did not. It makes you tender in places you used to keep armored. And if you treat that tenderness like a threat, you will keep pulling away from the very thing you prayed for in lonely seasons. That is the heartbreak. Still, this pattern should not be romanticized, but it should be understood with honesty. People who pull away when love feels real are not always cold. Many are deeply feeling people with a low tolerance for emotional exposure. They can love sincerely and still create distance that hurts others. Both things can be true. That is why insight matters more than excuses. Understanding the wound is not the same as letting the pattern keep running your relationships. If this is you, the real work is not just finding someone patient enough. The work is learning what feels so dangerous about being truly loved. Is it the fear of depending, the fear of disappointing someone, being seen too clearly, or losing yourself inside another person's expectations? Is it the fear that if love becomes real, so can loss? Is it the old belief that closeness always comes with pressure, obligation, or eventual withdrawal? These questions matter because the surface behavior is rarely the full story. Pulling away is usually a strategy, not an identity. It is something your system learned to do when closeness started feeling high stakes. And what is learned can be noticed, challenged, and changed. But change begins with precision. You have to catch the exact moment your body turns love into danger. Maybe it happens when someone is consistent. Maybe it happens when you realize they genuinely care. Maybe it happens right after you reveal something vulnerable, or when you feel yourself starting to need them more than you planned. That moment is everything, because if you do not understand it, you will keep blaming the relationship for what the intimacy activated. You will think the connection is wrong when the real issue is that being cared for has begun colliding with older fear. That does not mean every relationship should be forced. Sometimes pulling away is a sign of mismatch, poor timing, or unmet compatibility. But sometimes it is your self-protection mistaking emotional reality for emotional danger. Learning the difference is part of maturity, and maturity in love is not becoming less emotional. It is becoming more honest about what your emotions do when closeness stops being hypothetical. It is learning that safety can feel strange before it feels soothing. It is learning that the urge to run is not always wisdom. Sometimes it is memory wearing the mask of instinct. That does not mean forcing yourself into relationships that do not feel right. It means not automatically trusting every withdrawal impulse just because it arrives with urgency. Some impulses come from truth. Others come from old defenses trying to preserve a familiar kind of loneliness. And that loneliness can become seductive. It lets you remain self-contained, emotionally impressive, and privately aching without having to risk full reciprocity. But reciprocity is where real love lives, not in fantasy, not in almost, not in emotionally safe distance. In mutuality. In letting another person matter enough to change your day, while staying grounded enough not to disappear from yourself. That balance is hard for people who learn that closeness means engulfment or instability. They often swing between craving and retreat, need and numbness, pursuit and shutdown. The rhythm can look dramatic from the outside. Inside, it often feels exhausting. They are tired of wanting what they sabotage, tired of feeling lonely inside patterns they themselves keep reenacting, tired of meeting good people and suddenly feeling less available the moment those people become emotionally real. There's usually grief underneath that exhaustion. Grief for all the love they wanted but could not stay open enough to receive. Grief for the people who probably felt confused and shut out. Grief for the younger version of themselves who learned that tenderness needed to be managed carefully. That grief deserves compassion. But compassion without responsibility changes nothing. At some point, the person has to stop calling every deepening bond overwhelming just because it reaches past old armor. They have to ask a harder question. Am I losing interest, or am I losing the emotional distance that helped me feel in control? That question can change an entire love life, because sometimes what feels like a lack of chemistry is actually the discomfort of being safely met. Sometimes what feels like pressure is simply consistency. Sometimes what feels like a reason to leave is the first real invitation to stay. And staying, for this kind of person, is not passive. It is brave. It means remaining present after tenderness. It means not punishing a healthy connection for making you aware of your own fear. It means admitting when you need space, without turning space into disappearance. It means telling the truth before distance starts telling a distorted version of it for you. The truth might sound simple, but it is powerful. I care, and that makes me want to retreat. I feel close, and closeness brings up fear in me. I'm not trying to reject you, but I do notice myself pulling away when things start to matter. That kind of honesty can save people months of confusion. It does not solve everything, but it stops the relationship from being haunted by unnamed patterns. Because when fear stays unnamed, it quietly becomes behavior, and behavior is what other people have to live with. They do not experience your private intentions. They experience your delays, your mixed signals, your sudden coldness after intimacy. So if you crave love but pull away when it feels real, the path forward is not becoming harder. It is becoming clearer. Clearer about your limits. Clearer about your fear, your pacing, and the difference between emotional overwhelm and emotional incompatibility. Clearer about the fact that craving love is not the same as being ready to participate in it consistently. Readiness is built in behavior, not just desire. And if you are on the other side of this pattern, loving someone who keeps retreating, this matters for you too. Their pullback may come from fear, but fear still has consequences. Someone can care deeply and still be unable to create emotional safety. Someone can want you and still make closeness feel lonely. That is why understanding the pattern should never require abandoning your own needs. Compassion is not the same as tolerating chronic confusion. Healthy love can include fear, but it cannot survive forever on fear. At some point, someone has to learn how to stay. Not perfectly, not constantly, but honestly. Because love becomes real in the staying. In the text sent after vulnerability, the warmth that remains after the rush, the willingness to be affected without disappearing. That is what many people secretly crave more than romance itself. Not intensity, but continuity. Not just someone who wants love in theory, someone who can remain emotionally present when love starts becoming part of real life. And maybe that is the deepest truth here. People who pull away from real love are not empty. They're often full of feeling that has never been taught how to feel safe while staying open, so they confuse retreat with regulation. But regulation is not running before someone matters too much. Real regulation is learning how to feel the fear, name it, and remain in truthful contact anyway. To say, this is getting real, and that scares me. To let love become real without automatically turning reality into a threat. That is the shift, not from craving to indifference, but from craving without capacity to craving with courage. Because the goal is not to stop wanting love so much. The goal is to become someone who can still stay when the love you wanted finally has a face, a voice, and a place beside you. And when that happens, love stops being a fantasy you chase and retreat from. It becomes something quieter, stronger, and more human. Something you do not only crave in lonely hours, something you can actually live inside without running the moment it begins to feel real.